The suitcase was already fully packed when Marcus got home from school. Not by him. By his stepfather, who was standing in the driveway with it when the bus dropped him off, arms crossed, jaw set, in the way it got right before he said something he'd clearly been rehearsing all day. "You're 16, old enough to figure out the rest on your own." Marcus didn't argue. He had learned, over 4 years of living in that house, that arguing only made Victor angrier, and an angrier Victor was never worth it. He picked up the suitcase. It had exactly what Victor thought he needed: 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and $40 folded into an envelope, like severance for a job Marcus never applied for. His mother wasn't home. She worked doubles at the diner most Thursdays. Marcus would learn later that Victor had timed it that way on purpose. He stood on the sidewalk outside the only house he'd lived in since he was 12. And he did not cry. Because crying, he'd learned, only made things worse too. He picked a direction and started walking. Before we go any further, if you believe that the people who throw you away sometimes hand you exactly what you need to prove them wrong, hit like on this video right now and subscribe to Kindness Tales. Because what Marcus built after that driveway is the entire reason this channel exists. Marcus spent his first 2 nights in a 24-hour laundromat 2 miles from that house, sitting in the plastic chairs by the folding tables, because it was warm and nobody asked questions after midnight. On the 3rd night, an older man named Otis, who ran the small appliance repair shop next door and kept irregular hours himself, found Marcus asleep against a dryer and didn't call anyone. He just left a granola bar on the chair beside him and went back to his shop. They talked the next night. Otis didn't ask why a 16-year-old was sleeping in a laundromat. He asked if Marcus knew anything about small engines. Marcus didn't. Otis said that was fine, most people didn't, and offered him $5 an hour to sweep the shop floor and hand him tools whose names he'd learn eventually. It wasn't charity. Otis was careful about that, the same way most people in this story are careful about that word. It was work, and Marcus did it well enough that within 3 months, Otis had him doing basic repairs under supervision, and within a year, doing them alone. Marcus finished high school technically homeless, sleeping in a room above Otis's shop that wasn't quite legal but wasn't quite anyone's business either. Working every hour the shop was open, and most of the hours it wasn't. He read repair manuals the way other kids read novels, not because a teacher assigned it, but because understanding how something broken worked again felt like the one thing in his life that made sense on command. Teachers at his school never knew any of this. He showed up, did the work, left before anyone could ask questions he didn't want to answer, and graduated with a transcript that gave no hint of the year he'd actually had. Otis never asked Marcus to call him anything, never framed what he'd done as rescue, and never once brought up Victor by name, though he clearly knew the outline of the story from the little Marcus had let slip in the early weeks. What Otis offered instead was consistency. The same shop, open the same hours, the same small kindnesses repeated so often, they stopped feeling remarkable and started feeling like the ordinary shape of a life Marcus hadn't known he was allowed to have. At 19, Marcus had saved enough to buy a used van and take the repair business mobile, driving to houses and offices instead of waiting for people to come to him. At 22, he had 3 employees. At 25, he had a warehouse and a contract with 2 regional hardware chains to handle their appliance servicing. He named the company Kessler Repair Solutions, after his mother's maiden name, not his own and not Victor's. He did not think about Victor often. He thought about him exactly once a year on the anniversary of that driveway, and each time the thought was shorter than the year before. At 26, Kessler Repair Solutions had grown enough that Marcus needed a larger commercial space, and his lawyer, working through a standard acquisition process, forwarded him paperwork for a property being sold out of a small, struggling maintenance company going under after its owner's health-forced early retirement. The owner's name, on the very first page, was Victor Halloway. Marcus sat with that paperwork for 11 long minutes before he called his lawyer back. He did not do anything dramatic. He did not go find Victor to deliver a speech he'd never actually rehearsed, the way Victor once claimed to have rehearsed his. He simply proceeded with the acquisition, the way he would have with any other seller, paid a fair price determined by an independent appraiser, and included, in the standard terms, an offer of employment for any of the seller's existing staff who wanted to stay on. Victor was not staff. Victor was retiring, badly and reluctantly, out of a business that had failed slowly enough that he'd stopped noticing it failing until it was much too late. He found out who had bought his company's assets from a closing document 3 weeks after the sale. The same way Marcus had found out he was the seller. Victor called him once. Marcus let it go to voicemail. He listened to it twice, and what he heard was not an apology, not exactly, but something close enough to one that it surprised him more than the driveway ever had. Before we close this one out, if this story reminded you that the people who give up on you don't get to write the ending, drop one word in the comments. Driveway. It'll mean something to anyone who's ever been handed a suitcase they didn't pack. Marcus never called back. Not out of cruelty. He simply didn't have anything left to say that 4 years of a rehearsed voicemail could undo. What he did instead was keep building, keep hiring people who needed a second chance the way Otis had once given him one, and keep the shop above the laundromat listed quietly in the company's public history as where it all started. Otis still works there sometimes, mostly because he wants to, not because he needs to. Never assume the 16-year-old on the sidewalk with a suitcase has nothing ahead of him. Never assume that being thrown away is the same thing as being worthless. And never forget that sometimes the people who give up on you are simply too small to see what you're capable of becoming without them. If this moved you, like this video, subscribe to Kindness Tales and share it with someone who needs a reminder today that being counted out is never the same thing as being finished.